And sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and hath shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. And Lord, taste the day when the faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.
We invite you to stay tuned for the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of Mayfield Drive Baptist Church, located in Smyrna, Tennessee. We will now join the service.
All right. We welcome you back again to our Wednesday evening Bible study at the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church, and we are continuing in our study of the Apostle Paul, the chief And we look at this evening, part 38, the trial before Felix. Our text verses come from Acts chapter 24, verses 1 through 9. And after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, and we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took, and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain, Lysias, came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying these things were so." You talk about a kangaroo court. And by way of introduction, Paul had been taken by night to the city of Caesarea to face trial before the governor Felix. Felix ordered him held until his accusers could arrive from Jerusalem. Well, that didn't take a whole long time. When they finally arrived, the trial was soon to begin. After 5 days, Ananias and the high priest and the elders, along with a hired orator named Tertullus, arrived in Caesarea. Tertullus was hired to present their case against Paul before Felix. He was not a lawyer. He was just an orator, an orator. In other words, he was good at speaking, which is why I was making fun of him and going through the verses. And so he was hired to do the talking. He was considered to be well versed in Roman law as a prosecuting counsel. It is believed by some that he was a Roman who was able to give a formal oral abstract brief or declaration of the grounds for the prosecution of Paul. And here again, they still did not make him a lawyer. So let's look at Tertullus' presentation against Paul. When Tertullus was given the time to speak against Paul, he began to accuse him. But he began by flattering Felix, which was common, but I mean, you talk about laying it on thick. That's the reason I read those verses like I did. His opening speech was nothing but a case of base flattery used to influence a judge in a court of Roman justice. Dr. Albert Garner had this to say concerning his speech, and we quote, "We welcome it as deeply religious elders, both in everything and everywhere, your influence and reforms, changes for better reach." Yeah, this fellow Felix was not a good man. In this flattering open, where was a measure of truth, a little measure. For Felix had put down certain bandit gangs of robbers that infested the country, but himself dealt in every license and excess, according to Josephus, the historian. So he might have done a little bit of good, but as a man, was a lot to be desired. Most excellent Felix, a title of nobility conferred on him, who was formerly said to have been a slave. I have yet to find out how he went from a slave to a governor. There was some family influence, I think, somewhere along the line. But I hadn't found any record of that yet, so it's just about mostly speculation, I guess. With all kind of thankfulness. In other words, he said, more than I can tell you in feeble words. What pious hypocrisy and fickle flattery this orator Tertullus lay on thick. So thick you could cut it with a knife. Concerning such flattery, Solomon advised in Proverbs 28:23, he that rebuketh a man afterward shall find more favor than he that flattereth with his tongue. Even children seem to recognize fickle hypocrisy and insincerity in an exaggerated veneer over compliments. Children are pretty sharp, as we know by the little one that we have in our home right now. Of such, Job 17:5 reads, he that speaketh flattery to his friends, even the eyes of his children shall fail. In other words, will not be able to face or countenance it. Tertullus continued, yet in order that I may not hinder you anymore, or may take up no more of your busy, valuable time or schedule. Oh, this man is. Tertullus thus suggests that Felix was so engaged in public duties that he would not deprive him a moment of it more than necessary, making Felix feel important. He said, I appeal to you to hear us, to give a responsive hearing to me and my colleague elders from up at Jerusalem. Very briefly, in your forbearance, in your equity, your fair play, as opposed to strictly following the law, a thing that Tertullus and the grandiloquent, eloquent, flattering orator feared in this case. Why would he have feared holding to the law? They would not have found anything. He wouldn't have anything. You are correct. Both of you are correct. There was no evidence. Well, I get ahead of myself. He says, for we have found this man to be a pest, a rowdy meanderer, a loiterer, proof or specific example would have been more proper than bare exaggerated assertion in this court of Roman equity. The term pestilent means a plague breeder. Yet he was really a preacher of the gospel of life eternal health, not a disease spreader. and an inciter who stirs seditions. In other words, leads unpatriotic insurrections, exciting disturbances against the law and nation of Israel. This is a pretty serious accusation. Then why not give some specific example, please, Grand Orator? Pleading prosecuting attorney Tertullus. Among Jews, he says, everywhere, he was the hot air, the whole hog type of accuser without sustaining evidence. Yes, it does. Throughout all the inhabited earth. Well, that's a pretty big area for a man of influence for one, or for a big area, pretty big area of influence for just one man. That's a little bit ridiculous. I think even the most dense could have seen through that. Tertullus, would you name the witnesses to back up these first two claims? Where are they? Don't drag in all the population of all the Jews into all the world, which was what he was doing. Simply present 2 or 3 witnesses to sustain each of the charges, or cut off the hot air press. Please. And the lead man of the Nazarene sect, from which it is generally known that no good thing comes, a term of derision among the Jews who often asked, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? That's John 1, verse 46. Tertullus was, as a prosecuting attorney, the lead line witness against Paul. A professional, hired false witness who began his address with foamy flattery and lathered himself into a lying attack against Paul, alleging matters he knew were untrue and that he could not prove. I tell you, Brother Garner is just as good a wordsmith or better than Tertullus.
Right. His words are like ripples in water. Throw it on in and make this
Sidetrack here just a minute. I never will forget the first time he came to lecture at seminary I was attending in Ohio.
I know where this is going.
And I was in my second year, maybe third year. I don't remember exactly. Anyway, we're always, any guest speaker, any visiting preacher comes in, gets invited to preach during chapel time.
Oh, yeah.
So,
no, they're not invited. You're picked.
yeah. So, Brother Garner, he gets up and starts. And we're supposed to take notes now, because at the end of the semester, we have to turn these notebooks in. Okay? And president of the school, no less, looks through them, make sure that we all took adequate notes.
I know where this is going.
I want you to know, if you dropped your pencil, you were 20 minutes behind.
Yeah.
It took every bit of my concentration to understand what he was saying. I couldn't write anything down.
One thought on that, Brother Joe, can you imagine when I was ordained and the presbytery came out and it was Dr. Garner that's going to question me. Hey, can you imagine all said, oh, man.
Yeah, I understand what you felt, but I respected him greatly, but I was never intimidated by him. And somebody said one time, said, well, he's just a man. He puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like I do. Fast forward many years, and I have him in Jamaica at a Bible conference that I hosted with the Jamaican churches. And knowing him like I did, I said, now, Brother Garner, I said, I'm not telling you not to use your big words. But I said, when you use your big words, define them. I said, okay. Never a problem. He could come down to their level just as easily as he could spout it off up here.
And at the meetings, if the situation come up and he went to the mic, he's gonna say it like it is.
Yes, sir. I tell you, I miss him. Dead and gone now for several years, but I miss him.
Too, brother, if I ever had a question about history in the ABA,
Yes,
he could really explain it to me
yes.
in ways I couldn't read in a booklet.
Because he lived through it, that's why.
Exactly, and he would go by what his daddy had said. And all
Yes.
that. So it was, and that's one other thing on that too is when they were writing the book,
Mm-hmm.
and George Askins said that should we put it in there? He said we need to put the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes, yes. Okay. Who, attempting to profane or desecrate the temple, deliberately tried to pollute the temple, a third falsehood that he could not sustain with evidence. Note, Tertullus, the orator that Jerusalem Jews hired to prosecute Paul before Felix the governor, invented 3 basic false charges against Paul. Notice he invented them. Number 1 was the charge of sedition. Now, what is sedition? That's a national sin, isn't it? Or criminal act.
That's going against the causing the problem.
That's
Rebellion causing it's treason against.
treason. Yes, treason was the word that I was looking for. That is treasonous. Number 2, a charge of heresy. Heresy. And then 3, a charge of profaning or desecrating the temple without any truthful evidence to support a single charge. Now, all of these are very serious charges against Paul. And there should have been irrefutable evidence to back those charges up. And Tertullus goes on to say, whom we even went so far as to lay hold of. We grabbed in the very act in his polluting the temple. All right? The we. Okay? This was a deliberate lie. Not one witness, not one did they have to sustain this charge. And Tertullus knew it. They had just supposed that he had brought an uncircumcised Greek into the temple, which was not the case at all. And I think that was Titus. And he didn't take him in.
No, well, they saw Titus with Paul.
They saw Titus with Paul.
Exactly. So
But they did not see him in the temple.
Exactly.
If he was in the temple, he would have been in the outer court where anybody could have been.
Paul knew the law.
Paul knew the law.
Exactly.
he would not have taken Titus inside.
That was a court of Gentiles, wasn't it? The court of, what was it? I'm trying to think. It was an outer court.
It was an outer court, actually Solomon's porch. I think it was called the court of the Gentiles.
I think that's what it was. I don't know for sure. So
Beyond that, no non-Jew could enter. Or women. There was a court called the court of the women also. I don't remember all the arrangements and everything, how these courts were arranged, but where most of these things took place with Paul was close to the Fort of Antonio.
yes, there was the court of the Gentiles.
Yes. So if Titus would have been anywhere in the temple vicinity, it would have been in the court of the Gentiles. Tertullus then began to accuse Lysias, the chief captain, of rescuing Paul with great violence, taking him out of their hands. Tertullus seems to include himself with the Jews in this verse, but he was not a Jew, he was a Roman. He intended to sway Felix with a form of intellectual dishonesty. Yes. He infers that Lysias was interfering with business that was none of his affairs, when the truth is, it was every bit of Lysias' business, because they were about to kill Paul, and this was causing a riot, and it was Lysias' business to make sure that peace was maintained. He begins to infer that Lysias was wrong in commanding them to accuse Paul before Felix. In other words, he didn't have the authority to tell the chief priest and the elders to come down here to see you. Yes, he did. He had that authority as the individual who had the responsibility of maintaining law and order. In all actuality, Lysias was correct in his actions by doing so. Also, he did not use great violence in taking Paul out of the Jews' hands. He was ready to, and he gave his soldiers permission and command to if they had to, but they didn't. Also, he did not use great violence in taking Paul out of the Jews' hands. I said that already. The Jews backed Tertullus in saying that all that he had spoken was true. So this made them, this made the Jews part and parcel of the lies that Tertullus was telling. And it really wasn't any of their business to begin with. They were not the ones that started the whole thing. Who was it that did? Do you remember? Who was it that started all of this business? The Jews from Asia. It wasn't the local Jews to start with. Yes, sir.
Historically speaking, no wonder that the Jews have suffered so many, how shall I say it, Christ, and they said, his blood will be on our hands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this is another example.
Yes.
But God has always seemed to use these Gentile rulers to somehow discipline the Jews.
Yes.
And it still goes on.
Yes. God has done that ever since the nation of Israel has been in existence.
Exactly.
He's used the Philistines. He used the Assyrians. He used the Babylonians, the Romans, the Greeks, and on down the line.
There's another group, another King Edward I, Longshanks. To him, the Jews were personal property. And he was actually disposing them out of England and trying to get rid of them out of Scotland. That's another thing. Here's another example, so.
Yes. Yes. All right, this made them accessories to Tertullus' lies. We must note that no witnesses were called, no evidence was given at any time to substantiate the accusations against Paul. In any ordinary court, this would not have been acceptable. Now let's look at Paul's defense presentation. Acts 24 again, verses 10 through 21. Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, Forasmuch as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city. Neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. Now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee, and object if they had aught against me. Or else, let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me, while I stood before the council, except it be for this one voice, that I cried, standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. And boy, did that stir up.
Brother Joe, I'm just wondering if some of these so-called witnesses that basically would have been for Paul, I wonder if they just kept their mouth shut instead of being in trouble with. You begin to wonder, wouldn't say anything in his defense. I just wonder.
Probably scared for their position.
Exactly.
When we went through that, you remember that there's no doubt when Paul stood before the council, there's no doubt that there were some present who had been part of the original council that had sent Paul out with letters. and authorities. But they never spoke up. No one would speak up. And like you said, they were probably afraid for their position. So Felix gave Paul the opportunity to defend himself against the charges that were laid against him. The prosecution had not called any witnesses or presented, I left the word out, presented any substantial evidence against him. Paul began by greeting Felix and acknowledging that Felix had been a judge of the nation for many years, probably only about 6 or 7 years, and had the experience needed to adjudicate Paul's case. It wasn't the fact that Felix did not have any experience. He was experienced in doing this. He was experienced in being a judge. And he had been doing it, Paul says, for many years. But the historical facts are that it was probably only about 6 or 7 years that Felix had been reigned. But he did have the experience that he could have presented an honest opinion and summation in Paul's case. He was capable of listening to both sides. Paul states that he will cheerfully defend himself, not needing anyone else to defend him. I think he gets in a little dig at the chief priests and them. I can talk for myself. You had to hire somebody.
Your case is so weak that I don't need anyone else.
Absolutely. Paul had a little different opinion of them than everybody else had, and rightly so. Paul states plainly so that Felix would understand and could verify if he chose to do so. He was just 12 days removed from the time he went to Jerusalem. In other words, at that time that Paul was speaking before Felix, it had only been 12 days from the time that he had arrived to Jerusalem. Now, he makes that point for a purpose, that there exists no, or have been no more than 12 days, less than 2 weeks, as follows, and it's broken down. First, the day of his arrival in Jerusalem. And that was in Acts 21, verses 15 and 17. Second, his interview day with James in Acts 21:18. Remember, James was the pastor of the church in Jerusalem. Third, that of his vow, Acts 21:26. That took some time. The fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh day of his vow, ending in his arrest, Acts 21:27. And I think in all of these days, they remained in the temple during their purification. And I don't know for sure about that. Do you, Brother Bernie?
I'm not sure. But isn't it really strange whenever you have, when their mind should have been on holy things, their mind is on murder.
Right. Right.
Same thing during the with Christ.
Right.
They were, with the Passover going on, they had murder in their heart.
Right. I know that there were places in the temple like you might call them one-room apartments, because whenever a rotation of priests would come in, they would stay there until their course was over, and then they would go home. They would be there for what, 3 months, I think? Something.
They was always serving. It was just
Right. There were many of them, and they were all doing different things at different times, but they were always there. When they started their course, they were there until they finished. All right, the 8th appearance before the Sanhedrin. This is day number 8. Acts 22:30. Verse 30 is there twice. Verse 23 through 1 through 10. 9th, the 9th day, that of the conspiracy. Acts 23:12. You remember there was those 40 Jews, they bound themselves with a curse that they would neither eat nor drink until Paul was dead. 10th day, the dispatch of Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Acts 23 through 31. And the remaining period referred to in Acts 23:33 and then 24:1 to show how unlikely he had had time to do all that was alleged against him. In other words, where would I find time to do all of that?
exactly. That's how they do trials now. If a person's accused here, well, if he was here and here and here, as we do have a record, how could he have been over here? But they weren't listening. They could care less about the law.
Right.
Care less about it.
The truth doesn't matter.
This is why Tertullus was trying to circumvent the law by,
Yes.
you don't need to bother yourself with these, this menial trial here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, truth is always seems to be who's ever in control.
Right. Since when I went up into Jerusalem worshiping a very different purpose from that motive imputed to him by his accusers. Would a man who had gone to a place for worship maliciously profane the peace? Really? He wouldn't. You know, where is reason in this? There's not any reason in this. It's completely unreasonable. He would have Felix know that he had gone to the feast in a very reverent frame of mind to worship in spirit and in truth. John 4:24. As well as to carry alms to his nation. Romans 15:25 and 26. And they who accused me neither found me in the temple. He didn't have to be found. They knew where he was. But they didn't do anything until those Jews of Asia forced them to do something. He was there with others to worship, not incite trouble. Discouraging or disputing with anyone, seeking to stir up a controversy or argument with anyone, nor can they produce such a witness, or they would have. He was in the temple, not teaching. This is one of the few times Paul was somewhere and not preaching or teaching. Nor did they find me collecting or causing to come together a crowd, to incite sedition against my nation in any manner, nor have they or can they produce a single witness of such, I categorically assert. Neither did they find me in the synagogues, nor any other place throughout the city, doing a single thing that they have alleged through Tertullus. That first, I am a seditionist, traitor, treasonous. Second, that I'm a heretic. And third, that I have polluted or desecrated the temple. Nor are they able to prove to you or give factual, trustworthy evidence to you, meaning to Felix. Not a single one will go on the stand to give personal testimony against me on these charges, for not a single one can do it and tell the truth. With boldness, Paul pressed his innocence of the charges before Felix. Concerning the things of which they now and hereafter accuse me. After his defense, Paul begins to admit to Felix that what his accusers call heresy, he did worship. If there was any acknowledgement to any wrongdoing, this would have been it. Except it was not heresy to Paul, but it was to them. He states that he worshiped the God of his fathers, believed all the things that were written in the law and all that was written in the prophets. In other words, simply, he believed what was written in what we call the Old Testament. Those were the only scriptures that was available then. He went on to say that he had hope in God and believed that there would be a resurrection of the dead, both of the saved and unsaved. Because of this, he endeavored to work hard, that when he stood before the Lord, he would not have to give an account of not witnessing and doing his best for the spread of the gospel. He said, my conscience is clear. Now, he says, after being away from Jerusalem and Judea for many years, he returned with alms and offerings. The Jews from Asia found him in the temple, purified, neither with a multitude nor with tumult, but rather with only those men from the church in Jerusalem who had purified themselves with him. Those were the Jews that should have been present before Felix if they had accusations against him. In addition, those present before Felix should have presented any evil doing in him when he stood before the council, but they did not. If there was an exception, it would be touching the resurrection of the dead. He was being called into question. There was nothing in all this being presented that would justify the charges against him. And of that of heresy, he was a Pharisee. The Pharisees believed what he believed on that. The Sadducees didn't. So how could the council, being divided like they were, with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and maybe a few Essenes and other little groups sprinkled in, how could they have come to an equitable conclusion? They couldn't have.
And it goes back to, there were some, I think it was, which ones were that they would have accepted Christ for fear of the David. I'm trying to think, my mind's going all like this, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yes. There were some priests that did accept Jesus.
And someone wouldn't even stand up because of fear.
Of fear, yes. Yes. There were many who believed, but like Nicodemus, were secret disciples for a long time. Joseph of Arimathea was another. All right, any comments, questions before we look at the conclusion? Instead of giving a verdict right then, which would have occurred in a reasonable court, Felix wanted to have Lysias come down before him as well. And that is where we will begin in the next part. Any questions, comments?
Criminal charge for false charges against Paul and false witnessing against Paul at the Roman court? Wouldn't there have been some
You mean like slander
slander? Yeah.
or
Wouldn't there,
deceit in the court? You're not telling the truth?
wouldn't there have been some kind of disciplinary action against him for even if he wasn't even involved, just a beautiful orator, you know? Wouldn't there be something that Felix would have to do against him because of?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, no.
No. Felix had quite a bit of a power.
Yeah.
If he wanted to, yes. But if no one pushed the point, he would have.
It's always whoever's in the rule,
Yeah,
that's the truth.
that's the,
Right.
yes.
Whether it's right or wrong,
Oh, I know
that's
that.
always its way it's been.
I mean, if Felix found that, you know, all these accusations against Paul were false,
It wouldn't care, it wouldn't matter.
wouldn't matter. He
No,
wouldn't have
it
done
wouldn't
anything.
matter, because he was against Paul anyway.
Felix?
These ones that are coming crime, so.
Yeah.
I think, this is one of those things that you know,
You also got to remember that judge today does not mean what judge, as the word judge is meant for centuries,
Right.
thousands of years.
Yeah.
You know, judge in our society and our justice system is totally different. So in that case, Felix is the judge. So it's
Yeah.
kind of his determination. If he believes this well-skilled orator, even though he's spouting lies, then there is no appeal process.
Justice Solomon. Solomon is another example. Solomon was king, so he was judge.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of instances like
Wouldn't have
that.
any repercussions for the orator.
Right.
Had, Paul been found without guilt. It just would have been like, okay, everyone go back to your homes. Except
Right.
for Paul, and he sat in prison for 2 more years.
down through history, whoever's in rule, if they
Oh,
don't
yeah.
like you, they can prove you guilty without defense.
Show me the man, I'll show you the crime.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just a side note, even, you know, we talk about Braveheart. Did you know he was not even able to get his defense? It's not like the
Yes.
Well, that's the whole reason that Magna Carta was supposed to have been, when it was drafted, it was supposed to protect the people. Because it wasn't the, king's rule,
Yeah.
if you weren't liked, it was supposed to be, the law was supposed to be equal for everybody, even though we need it ratified again today.
Exactly.
Because it's that century, politics all over again.
Yep. Yep.
Those who have the money don't face any repercussions, and
Exactly.
those who don't have the money, well, get ready to,
You can't prove yourself innocent.
right.
All right. Brother Jim, would you dismiss, please?
We here at International Missionary Baptist Ministries are so thankful that you chose to watch or listen to this Wednesday evening Bible study. We will be broadcasting again at this same time next week. If you wish to contact us, we can be reached by email at imbr@imbmpodcasts.com. Our mailing address is International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. Again, I repeat, our email address is imbr@imbmpodcasts.com. Podcast is plural there. Our snail mail is